Hi guys, it's Debbie, and today I would like to share with you some, let's call them new actors I think you should really be keeping your eye on. Some of these are lesser known names, others, especially if you're really up to date on the movie industry, will be really familiar. But in a scene in which every other article seems to be a rotation of Zendaya, Timothée Chalamet and Anya Taylor-Joy, who for some reason are still being called the new and up-and-coming stars of Hollywood, I think the names I'll mention today are quite interesting. Of course, I would also like to know what you think about all these names I'll mention today, who you think is a new star to keep our eyes on in this industry, so make sure to leave a comment down below. The idea for this topic came when, I think it was The Hollywood Reporter, released the list of the 10 most in-demand up-and-coming movie stars, and of course it was all the usual suspects. Some of these actors are very good. Florence Pugh is absolutely incredible. Paul Mescal started his career with a blast, while others I think are on the list just for popularity reasons, like Jen Ortega and Sydney Sweeney. That's why earlier I was saying it would be nice and refreshing to read about somebody different and interesting rather than the usual names just because of their popularity. Right, first up, let's get him, let's say, out of the way, and please don't groan, because it's somebody who, if you've been following me for a very long time, you'll have heard me speak about countless times, and that is Lucas Hedges. He was somebody I always used to talk about, and then he kind of slid out of the spotlight. 5 or 6 years ago, he was being compared to Timothée Chalamet, and look at the different career paths that they took in the end. I personally love Lucas Hedges because he is absolutely great in realistic, very down-to-earth dialogues and nuanced characters. I actually can't really envision him in a, I don't know, big unrealistic setting. My favourite performance of his is in Manchester by the Sea, where I think he gave one of the most realistic renditions of a panic attack, but he was also a dorky boyfriend in Lady Bird, the bully brother in mid-90s, a victim of a gay conversion camp in Boy Erased, a struggling drug addict in Betty's Back. You may have also seen him in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, Moonrise Kingdom, Waves, Honey Boy, Kill the Messenger, but most of these great roles were all cramped into 5 or 6 years, and then he sort of again slid out of the spotlight. I know now he is focusing more on his stage career, but he has returned in 2024 with the film Shirley. Moving on, I wanted to mention somebody who won me over with just one role, and that is Ambika Mod through the series This Is Going to Hurt, which in my opinion is one of the best series released in the last years. The series shows the struggles of the NHS, doctors and nurses, the National Public Health Service in the UK in an overrun, overcrowded, underfunded OB/GYN department. Ambika Mod portrays a doctor in training who is really struggling with bullying and being overworked, and she is disillusioned with just how bad the situation is. And oh my goodness, how good she was, especially considering the fact that she was acting alongside somebody on the caliber of Ben Whishaw. That proves how good she was. That's sometimes the test to see how good an actor is. Putting them alongside another really good one. Remember when they tried to put Harry Styles alongside Florence Pugh in Don't Worry Darling, and how awful it was? On the contrary, when nobody expected Charles Melton to actually give the best performance in May-December, even though he was acting alongside Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore. Anyway, at the moment, Ambika Mod has starred in very few projects, but I'm sure she'll be landing many more roles in the future. Another British actress who is a little more famous, but of whom I think we've only seen a fraction of the potential, is Michaela Coel. She has actually been in huge productions. I think she was even in the Star Wars and MCU and Black Mirror universes, but she mostly gained all the praise for 2 series, I May Destroy You and Chewing Gum. 2 very different portrayals. In one, she's a woman trying to rebuild her life after being raped, and the other one, she is, let's say, trying to learn about the world. Earlier I was mentioning how Ambika Mod won me over with just one role. Well, I think the person who won over the whole world with just one role has to be Dominic Sessa with The Holdovers, which, as you know, is my favourite film of 2023. To give you some context to how good Dominic Sessa was, he literally wasn't an actor except in school plays. The movie was going to be filmed at his school, so they did some casting among the students, and he went on to deliver one of the sweetest, most heartbreaking, funny performances of the year. And just as Ambika Mod proved her strength acting alongside Ben Whishaw, Dominic Sessa did it alongside Paul Giamatti. Of course, now he's going to be starring in more roles, and you have to keep your eyes out for him in the future. I think last year's award season was great in showcasing some let's say lesser known actors. For example, the Oscars, which often tend to be a bit redundant, actually had many first-time nominees. Look at Lily Gladstone's success. She is also somebody to look out for, as although she had been in the industry for years, often in overlooked roles and films, I think the way she completely outperformed huge names like De Niro and DiCaprio in Killers of the Flower Moon is going to land her many more great roles. By the way, apparently at one point she had completely given up on acting just because it wasn't working out. And see how your cards can just turn in any moment. Anyway, I was saying how the award season shone a spotlight on many lesser known actors. Take for example Greta Lee, who gave such a powerful performance in Past Lives, and the same goes for her co-star Teo Yoo, who had been active for 20 years but who was discovered by the West mainly thanks to Past Lives. Another couple of co-stars who found huge success with the Oscars are Sandra Hüller and Christian Friedel, who gave a super creepy rendition of real-life Nazi commander Rudolf Höss and his wife in The Zone of Interest. It really was Sandra Hüller's year, as she also starred in Anatomy of a Fall. So although she's been acting since the 90s, she's now one of the most praised actresses and already has more projects lined up. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, you can already tell how some of these names are people who have been on the acting scene for the longest time. But you might ask somebody about them and they only really know them for their maybe latest, biggest, most popular project, which I guess it's still great if it then generates curiosity and people go and learn more about them, go and check out their older projects and offer them more opportunities. I'm often shocked when I hear how little people know about Riz Ahmed and Evan Peters, although they've been delivering one solid performance after the other for years, but then they're still relegated just to the Star Wars and Dharma guy. Again, it's still good that they're getting recognition, but sometimes I think about how Riz Ahmed's Oscar victory for The Long Goodbye was barely aired, and how Evan Peters basically only gets questioned about how dark it was to play the role of Dharma. But again, just sometimes that one good popular performance is what you need for that push to stardom and to further projects. I mean, honestly, who had heard of Enzo Vogrincic before Netflix's Society of the Snow? And now everybody can't wait to see more of him. Speaking of Netflix, the world basically discovered Jessica Gunning after her powerful role as Stalker Martha in the new series Baby Reindeer. The power streaming platforms like Netflix have is insane. Before making this video, I remembered Maitreyi Ramakrishnan, as I know she's been very popular after just starring in Never Have I Ever. And I found out that at only 22 years old, she has like over 6 million Instagram followers. Okay, getting back to our list. Another interesting name who seems to be everywhere all the time, but who never gets a fraction of interest as other actors, is Christopher Abbott. He's such a great actor. He's been in very famous films like Poor Things, but one of his roles I really liked recently was On the Count of Three, which, if you remember, was on my list of best films of 2022. In it, he gave such a powerful rendition of a man who makes a suicide pact with his friend, which evolves into so much more. I don't know, even in films like Possessor, he was such a great actor. I really don't know why he doesn't get more attention. I think a female counterpart to that constant flow of good projects, but without ever reaching full stardom, is Jessie Buckley, who has been in so many good films and series, but is always relegated to that recognizable face but on which you can't place a name figure. She was in Women Talking, Chernobyl, I'm Thinking of Ending Things. A recent film I suggest watching with her is Fingernails, actually alongside Riz Ahmed, who I mentioned earlier. It's a particular love story, but in a world where couple compatibility is tested scientifically. I really hope she will get more recognition in the future. Maybe her starring alongside Christian Bale in Maggie Gyllenhaal's upcoming movie The Bride will give her that push she needs. Another interesting actress who I think suffers from that, a recognisable face in movies but who is never really remembered by name, is Thomasin McKenzie. She's famous mostly for Jojo Rabbit, but she was also in Last Night in Soho alongside Anya Taylor-Joy, Shyamalan's movie Old, and in my opinion, most importantly to prove her capabilities, she was in Eileen alongside Anne Hathaway, where she, in my opinion, acted even better. Another interesting name on my list is Harry Melling, who, you might say, Dudley Dursley from Harry Potter, I say. Yes, Harry Melling was for years associated just with his willfully exaggerated role of Harry Potter's mean bully cousin, but then years later, we're talking his first different role was 6 years since the last Harry Potter film was released, He started popping up in all sorts of interesting movies, and people were surprised he was actually so much more than what they associated with Dudley's comedic personality. Moving along the list, we have Katie Spaney, who is actually now starring in the new Alien movie, Alien Romulus, but I'm not particularly interested in that. I rather started really liking her from films like Civil War. As you know, it's one of my favourites of this year, and I quite liked her quiet, sad rendition of Priscilla Presley in the movie of the same name. She's already made her name for herself in quite a variety of genres and has rarely received really bad criticism, so I think she has a good road ahead. I also think Caitlin Dever is a really interesting actress. She's been working in really big projects but never really getting that huge push. Further to her more famous roles, I recently watched the series Dopesick, in which she plays a young woman who gets addicted to OxyContin, and it was so heartbreaking. Renate Reinsve, I hope I didn't butcher her name, is quickly moving into more famous productions. She used to be relegated just to Norwegian productions. For example, you probably will have heard of her from The Worst Person in the World, but now, just a couple of years later, she is alongside Jake Gyllenhaal in Apple's TV series Presumed Innocent. I actually watched a pretty peculiar film with her recently, Handling the Undead, in which, well, the dead come to life and their loved ones need to figure out what's going on and what to do. Honestly, I still need to wrap my head around it, but if you're looking for a curious watch, this could be an interesting suggestion. Franz Rogowski absolutely blew me away with his performance in Passage, which was also on my list of best films of 2023. I also recently saw him in the Italian film Freaks Out, and I'm curious to find out more about his roles. I have seen very little of him, and he is still quite in the shadows despite the amount of productions he's been in. By the way, in Passages, he starred alongside Adele Exarchopoulos, who I also think is one of those people who everybody recognises, especially just as Adele, but then who rarely come up in conversations. Why? I'm still a bit hesitant about Hunter Schafer. I wish I could say I'm so really excited for her upcoming projects, but she only really starred in a couple of interesting projects which still didn't blow me away as, for example, Ambika Mod with just one role. I'm still curious because I really liked her in Euphoria, but at the same time, I didn't mind Sydney Sweeney in Euphoria, but then they tried to put her in different things and it isn't exactly working out. Anyway, I have to admit, I'm very, very curious about the new horror movie Cuckoo starring Hunter Schafer, which might be the role that turns my opinion around. I'm going to be really nasty now and say that Josh O'Connor is on all these lists of upcoming actors you have to keep your eye on. And he's a good actor. I mean, I liked him in Challengers, I liked him in The Crown, but I'm just not all that hyped up about him at the moment. Maybe when things are so talked about and covered and you just see him everywhere, the excitement runs out. By the way, no, I haven't seen Lucky Mare with him yet. Do you think that could be the role that could make me change my mind? Sometimes I feel the same about Rachel Sennott, who always dominates these lists of young actors you should keep your eye on. And I mean, I guess she isn't bad. I liked her in Bottoms, I liked her in Shiva Baby, but my excitement always runs out when somebody becomes the huge poster figure for something lesser known. It kind of defeats the purpose, if you see what I mean. Like, you're this lesser known star, but with 700k followers, although that now means I would have to check every day I mention today's follow account. You get what I mean. Anyway, other interesting actors I have my eye on are Jessica Baden, who I particularly liked in the movie Holler and in the series The End of the Effing World. I haven't been following Bella Ramsey's career too much, but it looks like she's having a great couple of last years success-wise, working for example in Game of Thrones and alongside Pedro Pascal in The Last of Us, but I really don't know much about her. I just recently watched Catherine Called Birdie with her. Paul Raci was somebody who I discovered years ago in a music video for the song The Ride by Neanderthal. I really liked the song, and it was the first time I saw a music video acted in sign languages. Then, years later, he was in Sound of Metal alongside Riz Ahmed, and I've always been curious about him since. Now he's in A24's new movie Sing Sing with Colman Domingo, so that seems interesting. Unfortunately, there are also some actors who had heaps of potential, but at the moment would need a massive push to get back into the spotlight. Think of Millie Shapiro, who gave such an incredible performance in Hereditary, one of the most popular modern horror movies. Everybody expected her to kick off her movie career, especially with horror movies, but she never made another movie since. Often with horror movie stars, if they give even just one great convincing performance, they assure themselves a future as scream queens or kings, like what happened with Micah Monroe after It Follows. I'm still curious to see where Millicent Simmons will go after her roles in the A Quiet Place movies and Sophia Wilde after Talk to Me. Other actors just disappear from the spotlight without us really realising. Ansel Elgort hasn't been acting for a good 3 years and doesn't have anything upcoming soon, and nobody's really talking about it. But now I'd like to hear what you think about all these names I mentioned today, who you think are actors we should really keep our eye on. Let me know everything with a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.